right, we're currently recording this. In this webinar, what we're going to talk about is the ability to save the settings when you set them up in a machine. So in your Happy machine, and this is for touchscreen machines, if you send a design to the machine, and you can either do that by sending it by USB cable, but if not, normally in the touchscreen machine, you go to the main menu, and then go to read, and of course, just read from your stick, and then just click on a design, and then it'll beep twice, and then it'll load. So after that, you're going to generally do two things with the design, no matter what else you're going to do with them. You're at least going to set up the colors, which means going to this screen here, needle or color setup, set your color sequence here, any stops or frame outs if you're doing applique. There's no need once you set your colors to hit enter or set or anything like that. They're done. So once you've done that, just escape back out to the main screen. The second thing of the two things you're going to do is align it with a hoop and set the sewing position. So you do that by pressing this green button here, clicking on change up here, and then you can select from any of the Happy brand hoops. You can select from any of the Happy brand hoops, or go to custom, and then of course add any of the custom 1 through 5 or any of the 10 additional slots where you can add non-Happy brand hoops. Once that's done, you escape back out, and then the new hoop will appear here on the left side, and then you can adjust the sewing position by using the arrow keys to move here, or even tap in the area here, and the design will then jump to that position. And you can always trace to continue forward to make sure that it's going to fit and verify your check. So going back home, again, you set your colors. You've also selected a hoop. Now, one thing I just suggested is that you can adjust the position by moving, using the arrow keys by moving the arrow keypad, or by moving the design by tapping a position within the available area of the hoop, causing the blue outline of your design to then jump to that position. The problem that I see a lot of people having is sometimes you're going to know that in advance that you're going to have some kind of garment or other items that you can't sew in the dead center, and you're going to sew a lot of them, let's say 10 or 20 copies, and or maybe even 100. And once you've set the new position, that design will stay. If you do it in this screen, that design position will stay there as long as you do the run. But once you move off to a different design, the machine will if you are going to sew that design in a position other than what you just sewed this design in, then it's going to lose its position. So it'll only be good for the particular run. So you can actually do this in a way that will always remember the position off, how far off center you've moved it, and save it permanently with the design. So let's say that you've got, for example, a blanket, and it always has to use this hoop, and you want to sew in the very corner of the blanket down here, no matter how, even if you have a small square hoop, but it's a tiny monogram that really has to be just so in the corner of the blanket, in the corner of the, furthermore in the corner of the available sewing area. So once you move that, you can do that here, but once let's say the customer comes back and orders that a year later, you've lost that position. So that can be saved. Other things that can be saved is anything that you do in the settings screen. So if you go to the main menu and go to setting, there are a bunch of things that you can do here. Like, for example, one of them is scaling adjustment. This one is full compensation, which means if you have your letters or your satin stems are too narrow because they're sewing out, you can increase this from 0 to 0.2, 0.4, typically 0.6. That will make them wider. Or you can rotate this by individual, in 90-degree increments. So any changes you make here can also be saved together with that. And then anything else in this screen will also be saved. And here's where I'm going to actually have to jump off so I can show you so I can kind of show you this other screen. or the other subscreens for this again, this is called the setting screen. So I'm going to go ahead and go to a little preview of the setting screen. Here we go. Okay, so like I said, in this screen, this shows you the scaling, satin pull compensation, any rotation in individual degrees or in 90-degree increments. Okay. So, for example, if I hit this P here, then there's 8 orientations of the P, and however the P is oriented is exactly how the design is going to be reoriented. I can also do it, the next one by individual degree. Like if I type in 45, that's 45. Now this next screen over, so if I, instead of hitting this button here, I hit this button right here. Now this is the number of repeats. So if you're doing several patches in one screen, like maybe or several copies of the design in one big hoop, anything that you save here will be remembered. So I'll skip right on through that. But the next one is really more interesting, and this third screen is called offset. And when you click on this third button, how far off center that you move it is going to be is going to be remembered. So that's the most important thing is, and what you're going to do with this, and I'm having trouble showing this, but there's a button down, it's actually this button right here. So in this third screen, this bottom button, you press this, it'll say frame move, and then you can move the design around using these arrow keys, and you hit set, and then what will happen is that you can then move it off center wherever you need to, and it'll remember that. So when I go back home, then it'll be off center by whatever degree you wanted. But when you ever you move it, it'll also remember the number. So you can either write that down, or this is where we're kind of getting down to it, is that let's say you've got all these things that you want to remember you've set with the design. So what you're going to do is, and I'm going to have to go to my screen capture here so you can see, it's in the pattern menu. So bear with me here while I find that pattern subscreen. What you're going to do is you're going to hit this next button here until you get to a point where you can save the design to a stick. And actually here it is. Hit the scroll button until you see a little flower with an arrow going to a stick. And again, this is in the pattern button. And when you do that, it will let you save the design to your USB stick. And when you press that button, it's going to ask you this question. So I'm going to go ahead and write this down. The question is going to be, it's going to ask you, create HP1 file. So if you say yes, the machine saves a file onto your stick with the same name, but with a .hp1 extension. So every time you save the design off the stick, by using this button and you create the HP1 file, everything that I just talked about is saved on the stick permanently. So that position offset and also any adjustments as far as sizing, rotation, color sequence is saved, so that so if the customer comes back 2 years later and you have it, that's all saved in there. So that's that's a pretty useful way of doing it. And if you do this in Happy Link too as well, and send that to the machine, Happy Link will also send the HP1 file. So that's basically how you save your settings for any design setup you're running. Anybody have any questions about that?
Yes.
As we're talking? Go ahead.
On the offset, would this be something until there's more memory? Could I put the offset for the clamp that I have, the clamp system I have, I think it's 75, I'm not sure. Anyhow, if I put that in and save it, then since my window frames might be the same as other hoops I have, I could just
Right.
go with those hoops. But if I save the offset, it would offset it so that I could use the clamp.
Yes, you could, but it would be saved with the design and not necessarily associated with the hoop. So very good question. So instead, you load it in here, and what you would have to do is hit the center button, which is this, so you're working from center. Then go ahead and load the design in, and then when you trace that offset, it'll actually move the hoop back. Right.
Okay, so
The only problem with that is, for example, with the clamp, you've got the clamp shoves the window towards you because all that structure behind it. So every time you use the clamp, you've got to move the clamp back. For the 9-inch base, you've got to move it back. You've got to move it back 80 millimeters, and then for the what is it, the 7-inch base, the smaller one, then it's got to move back by 60.3 millimeters. And that's going to be the same for every window that you put on there.
right.
But the problem is that if you have a small hoop selected here in the screen and you move it back by the offset, it may push it. If the happy machine doesn't think that the hoop is big enough, it'll stop you. So it's probably better to remember the offset here when you're going to your frame screen, and then you choose custom. After you've added it, so you load in your hoop map here. Then you hit this button, and it should tell you. Then it should remember the offset with that hoop. So it's better to do it with a hoop.
Well, the only problem with that is I've run out of room, and I've got 2 more windows on my clamp.
Okay. Oh yeah, I know, and that was a good. I think, Froggy, you've got a legitimate request, that because there are a lot of people who have more than 10 hoops. So, all right, Jim's got a good question. Is that he can't see the flower to USB stick. It's there on all firmware versions. What you do is you go to your pattern screen, and you want to find this button right here, and this is called scroll to the next page, because there's several quote-unquote pages of icons for the right side. Scroll through it, you'll see it there. So hopefully you can find it, Jim. So good question. Okay. All right, so Josh, hopefully this is also helping you as well. And I'm going to just pause here for a few seconds to make sure anybody has any other questions. Joe, Josh, Joe, if you're there, Josh, Froggy, and Jim.
I'm trying to learn the new system. I can't type in.
I'm learning it too. So
Joe, you have to. Renee, how did you tell me to pull up that window? Oh, chat. Joe, go to the bottom where it says chat. On my screen, it was flashing in orange.
Oh, I see it now, yeah.
Okay, if you hit that, then you'll get a little white screen that comes up, and at the bottom of it, at the top, it has all of the write-ins. Most of them are from Jim and Josh, and then where it says send to anyone, you can type your question. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I much prefer to be muted. I have 2 big dogs here. You never know when they're going to go off. Thanks.
Jim, make sure you're scrolling. There's several screens there, so scroll through it. That should be there. So to answer the question, it should be there. So I don't know if you see my screen, but again, you've got to hit this button several times until you see scroll or save off to a stick. Okay, cool. All right, I'm glad you're able to find that. Joe, I'm glad you can join us. One thing I was going to say is that button I'm finding flashes orange. If anybody types anything, it should flash orange. Like right now, I typed hello. So if you have chat off screen, when I close my chat, it does that. So if you close the chat so you can see the screen, it's going to stay under the More tab until you until it flashes orange and you choose to bring it up. Okay, the other topic that I had was, can you all see the today's topics and the list that we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so one big discussion that we talked about in the last couple of days in class here is tips on improving quality. The quality of your sew out on your machine. And there's a lot of that gets into fundamentals like making sure you have good tension, making sure that everything's locked down nice and tight. Otherwise, the machine's running pretty loosely. That you may not have an exact lineup and everything like that. But it wound up being a big discussion. And one of the things that I can't emphasize enough, and there's, I think probably Josh, you're the relative newbie here, so I'm going to address this to you more than anybody. But I think everybody here could, if you haven't heard this enough, there's really not enough overemphasizing it. Is that one of the things that the machine will do to a design that you're going to see more than anything is that especially any satin stitches are going to shrink. And one of the icons that we talked about earlier is the setting screen, is this button here, which is this function here, which increases the width of your satin stitches. And if I had any general advice that I learned out of class that I should be giving out more, is that anytime you sew out lettering, anytime that you sew out anything with a satin stitch detail, plan on it always being narrower. So and one thing that I learned in using a digitizing program that I can kind of illustrate this. I have my little stitch and sew program that we sell through TexMac here, but it has a unique ability to let me demonstrate what that pull effect does. So I'm just going to type the letters A, B, C, and what you want to be aware of is I'm going to type this like 1 inch high, but this actually tends to happen on smaller text. And let's just make just a standard block font so you can see this. Block large would be fine. And I'm gonna make this nice and big. And I'm going to view this so that the black lines on the screen are the way think of your wireframe or the way the letters are intended to be made. So the blue is the stitching. It fills out to the edges of those lines, or what we call either the vector lines or your wireframe. So or if you're another comparison I make is if you're baking a cake, that's your cake mold, and so the stitches will fill out to the edges of that cake mold. But I'll show you that. So if this is the way you want it to be, so I'm going to leave that up top. The way it actually tends to sew out is that the letters will always shrink along the direction of the stitching. So I'm going to show you that if you, this is, so I'm going to add, I'm going to do something that will make it look a little bit more the way it's going to sew out. So if we look at this, you want to train yourself to assume your letters are going to look like this. So I'll give you a kind of a top and bottom view. Pardon me, guys, I'm still working around the interface. So, okay, so the top is what we want it to sew out looking like. The bottom is what it'll tend more to sew out looking like. In fact, I can probably make it even more severe, is let's make this even further. Let's see what happens. Okay, well, I guess that's about as thin as that's going to get. So letter stems will always sew out thinner if you don't anticipate for it. If you tell a digitizer, I'm going to sew out on something that will cause this, which will be something stretchy, like anything, for example, that's a knit, like your Under Armour type garments, piqué knit, golf shirts, towels, fleece, it's going to shrink. The other factor that's going to cause that to shrink is also the thickness. So a thick knit sweatshirt, for example, is your worst case scenario, and your lettering, any satin stitch detail will tend to sew and look more like the bottom here. And what's really bad is because it shrinks along the direction. I'll show you. Another effect that if you don't catch it, you're going to get a lot of complaints from your customers. Look at if I run a baseline, I run my horizontal line across the A, B, and C here, you can see that they're more or less level. The C was deliberately made so that it would sew a little bit bigger, because otherwise it will lose a little bit of height. So the top A, B, and C, they more or less line up. But if I line up my A, you can see that the B is starting to shrink. You're going to see that vertical letters like the A or letter I or the K, they're going to stay the same height. They'll actually grow a little bit. But because the stitching of the B, where it's supposed to meet the height of the A, is vertical, it's going to shrink towards its center. The stitches on the A shrink towards their center, but they shrink left and right only. But vertical stitches will shrink up and down. So you're going to lose height on your letters. So, and you're going to lose height on your letters where their sections run horizontally, like an O, a C. Now, this C was digitized to compensate for that, but this B is not going to line up with this A. This A will be a lot taller. So you think to yourself, well, how do I prevent that? So in short, the stretchier the fabric you sew on, the thicker the fabric you sew on, and if both are thick and stretchy, the effect on the lower, of what you're seeing on the lower screen here is going to be even more pronounced. To compensate for that, the short answer is that if you're digitizing your own lettering, then you should be able to do that by edit your lettering, whatever program you've got. And there's a setting in most digitizing software called pull compensation. This shrinks due to pull. Pull compensation generally means compensate by making it wider along the width, so you don't have that. So in Stitch and Sew, it's called stretch. I put negative stretch on here to cause it to shrink, but really you're typically adding 10 to 15%, or if you have a different program, maybe 0.2 millimeters. And then when I add that 15%, let's see what it looks like. So you can see if I viewed my outline stitches, you can see it grows beyond, the stitches grow beyond the intended shape to compensate, because it's assuming it's going to shrink. And then therefore, the ABC at the bottom, even though it looks thicker, is going to shrink so that it's sewed like the upper part. And this looks like it's not a big deal, but I've got 1 inch high lettering, but once you get down to 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch high lettering, any shrinkage is even more pronounced. So you don't have as much to shrink back to, and you get letters that really don't look good. So this is actually a decent looking example where it doesn't make a big difference. But smaller lettering, and again, especially on stretchy knits, and also in combination with thick items, this gets more pronounced. So you can do that in the software, but if not, to make this, bring this to the machine, you go to your, right here, which we got to again from your sewing screen, go to your main menu and go to setting. And in this first tab screen here, this lets you add satin width. If you don't think the design is sewing out was meant for that type of fabric, then go ahead and add 0.2 millimeters here. So just hit this button, set a value of 0.2, and that will boldface your satin stitches in the right direction so that you won't lose width. All right, any questions about that? Go ahead.
Will the 0.2 millimeters stay that way in settings until we change it, or does that?
Yes.
So if I put that in and then I'm doing something, I'm doing a design, my satin stitching in that design is going to change the same way I had it for the lettering?
That's a really good question. Is that you, Froggy, that's asking?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. Okay, so that's a really good question. And the answer is no. This is specific to the design, but the Happy Machine also has a place where you can bias all incoming designs. So, and I'll be honest with you, with my personal machine at home, my 15 needle, I have it turned on permanently. So where you do that is if you escape back out. So Froggy, I wasn't even going to bring it up, and that's dead on. I really should have brought it up. So thanks for asking the question. Is in your main menu, go to option, and this will be true also in your older machine too as well. Well, in your create menu, it's going to be there in your older machine, but go to option, and then go to your machine options. Let me try that one again. So I think this one's misprogrammed, but option, and let me go and bring that up in my my viewer here. So if I can see this, this is going to be machine options. So I'll go through my list of settings. I've captured just about everything here. So, all right, here we go. So you've got, it's not going to be this one. Here we go. Okay, so when you go to option, you choose this machine option here, and you get this screen. And what you're going to be looking for is with data all. Not with data limit here, but with data all. There it is, right here.
Right.
So 0.2 millimeters typically is a safe number. It's enough to be visible. Set that. That bias is also, it'll only affect the satin stitches for every design that comes in after you set this. It will automatically make them bolder by that degree.
But if you're doing beans, obviously bean stitches don't have any width. But what
Right.
if you're doing a fill stitch? Let's say you're doing a random fill stitch. Is it going to affect that as well, or just straight satin?
It's only going to affect satin stitches. And for those of you who are watching this closely, what you're seeing here is a satin stitch. If I show my stitch points in this program, you can see the stitch points are only on the edge. Fill stitches are different. I'm going to convert this letter to a fill stitch. So this A here is a satin stitch like the rest of them.
Can you put
But
that?
I'm going to convert this one on the left.
It's 3 o'clock.
So I'm going to convert this to a fill stitch, and you can see with a fill stitch, this sets it so you have needle penetration points in the middle. And if you see what that looks like in 3D, so I'll go to 3D view, you can see that creates a little pattern in here. So it's not quite as pretty as a satin stitch, but anyway, it gives you a flatter look. But this will, the machine program in your Happy Machine will detect that this has this pattern of stitching in here, and it will ignore these stitches. But if it detects a back and forth like that with no stitching in between, it assumes that's a satin stitch and would make this wider by whatever setting you wanted to.
Okay, so I can set all three of my machines that way.
Yes, you can.
And point two is a fairly
It's a starting number.
Good way to start. Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
In fact, when I used to teach digitizing, well, I still teach digitizing classes. When I teach digitizing classes, I recommend everybody bias their output to be 0.2 millimeters wider on your satin stitches as full compensation. So this is exactly the same thing, the Happy Machine, and I've sewn them out and compared. It really gives you just a visible amount of extra width, which works on larger letters, but on smaller letters, it's a lifesaver when you get that shrinkage. So if you're flying blind and you see a lot of lettering stems that's too narrow, putting a 0.2 will bias your letters up and it'll look better. There's only a few, I'll disclaimer this out by saying there are very few instances where this will cause a problem. And that's if you have thin, tiny letters where that extra 0.2 will will close up the hole on an A or a B or a P or something like that. But that's really rare. If you're in that kind of situation, then you really have no business sewing lettering that small anyway, because that creates other problems. So a 0.2 is a nice safe bias, and I've got that permanently turned on my personal machine at home, and it actually really helps a lot.
When you're using like the 4mm lettering, isn't it that pull comp shouldn't make a difference as long as you're using 60 weight thread, would it?
You're still going to lose it. It really depends. If you have really good alphabets, you should be able to get 4 and 5mm high letter without having to change from your 40 weight thread. But if you really want to get under 3mm on a regular basis, and you're doing that a lot, then sure, go to your 60 weight thread. You're still going to lose width. So I think the 0.2 would be fine. When you're going to finer thread, the rows are thinner, so you actually want to increase your density so that you're having more stitches per inch in there. That's really, it's not the pull compensation in that you're digitizing for smaller thread. It's your density that you're going to change.
But if I changed all my machines to adding the 0.2, then if I'm doing something with small letterings, I could just go to that setting on the setting area and put a minus. Let's see. What would
no, I would leave it at 0.2 even for the smaller lettering.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, because it's still doing the same thing to the small. Yeah, it was still doing the same thing to that thread. Length is the same. It's just that your lines are thinner with finer thread, so your density should change, but not your pull compensation.
Okay.
That's what I was saying. So hopefully that makes sense. But if you have any questions, and try that, it should help on that too as well. Okay. All right. So great question, Froggy. All right, guys. Well, we've come to the end of that particular topic. I'm going to call that on the webinar